The day my own son slid a care agreement across the kitchen table and asked me to sign it, I was peeling carrots for his little girl's soup. Lila stood at the counter arranging vitamins in a weekly pill box as if she were saving my life, and Peter cleared his throat like an accountant about to deliver good news. "Mom, this will help us organize everything," he said, tapping the line that said Dependent Services, Full Transfer of Decision-Making. It was written in the cheery font they use for children's menus. I didn't answer right away. My wrists ached from the carrot peeler, and for a second I felt exactly the way I'd feared for years, a nuisance at someone else's sink, another task to be put in a binder. But then I saw the stapled packet behind the agreement, and the top page snagged my eye, a screenshot of an email reminding Lila that the annuity caregiver rider can't pay without a dependency declaration signed by the beneficiary. The sender wasn't the bank, it was Raymond and Company Advisory. Ray had been my late husband's friend from church, the man who'd set up Jack's union annuity and smiled at me at potlucks like a benevolent uncle. He had no business emailing my daughter-in-law. I kept my voice soft. "Tea first, dear. Chamomile, yes?" Lila smiled, thin and bright. "Of course, Eleanor. We're worried about you. It'll be easier if everything is in one place." I poured water over the tea bag and watched steam fog the window. Being a burden had been my mother's terror. She'd begged me not to put her in a home when her memory began to fray. I managed her care at our dining room table with a stack of index cards and a blister pack calendar I drew by hand. I knew what real care looks like. It isn't a cheerful font. It isn't a rider. It's the sound of a spoon against a cup at midnight and the patience to warm a cold hand. I set the tea down and felt my own hands steady. "If this helps you, I'll sign," I said, and Peter exhaled like he'd been underwater. Then I excused myself to the bathroom, folded the stapled packet into the waistband of my skirt like a teenage thief, and texted the only person who would answer without judgment, Hannah, my niece, a quiet, serious girl who worked somewhere in the gray world of insurance audits. "Sweetheart," I wrote, "what does a caregiving rider do, and why would Ray be emailing Lila about mine?" Hannah's reply came in 3 dots, then nothing. Then, "Aunt Nora, where are you exactly? I promised to sign after supper." But I didn't return with a pen. I came back with my reading glasses, a small notebook, and the kind of calm that made Lila glance at Peter with the quick flick of someone who realizes she might have moved a chess piece too soon. I slept on their sofa that week under a crocheted throw I'd made for Peter when he was 7, the one with crooked squares he used to lay over his knees when he played video games. Now he stepped over my slippers in the morning as if they were a spill someone should mop. The little humiliations came like hail, tiny, frequent, and designed to chip the edges. Lila sent a photo to the family group chat of me scrambling eggs at 6 a.m. with the caption, "Mom's up. We're so lucky." And a winking emoji. At church, she squeezed my elbow when I tried to stand for coffee hour and whispered, "Maybe sit, darling, you don't want to overdo it." When I did go up, I could hear the pastor's wife murmur, "It's a mercy they've taken her in." The word mercy stuck to me like a price tag. The care agreement moved from the fridge to the coffee table, then back to the fridge with a pink post-it from Lila, "Just need your John Hancock." As if her cheerfulness could sand down the coercion. She scheduled a meeting with Ray from Advisory in their living room as if he were a cousin stopping by. "Nora." "There she is," Ray boomed, smelling of aftershave and sincerity. He wore the same soft-shouldered blazer I remembered from Jack's retirement party. "Jack always said you had the best head for figures in the hospital." His voice was an arm around my shoulder with a hand I didn't trust. He opened a leather folio and slid out another document. "This is a standard limited power of attorney, Nora. Only for health-related disbursements. It'll make claims smoother." He glanced at Lila, whose smile sharpened. "And the caregiver rider requires dependency, so we just need that declaration. Entirely routine." I worked as a hospital accountant for 24 years. Routine means the thing the clerk says when the policy has a trap in it. I read the lines slowly and found the trap, an innocuous checkbox labeled "Springing on Physician Certification," activated not by incapacity, but by care necessity, which could be defined by my son. If signed, Peter could authorize reimbursements from my annuity on my behalf, and the ledger would show beneficiary benefit, even if the funds were routed to registered caregiving services. I asked for a day. Of course, Ray said. We're all family here. He patted the page. The union is strict. We wouldn't want you to miss a month of benefits. That night, Hannah sat across from me in the 24-hour diner off Route 7, her hair in a messy bun and her laptop open to a spreadsheet that made my old accountant heart ache with a shameful, grateful joy. Aunt Nora, she said, tapping the screen. Your annuity has an optional caregiver rider that pays a stipend to a registered provider when the beneficiary is dependent. It's good when it's real, keeps people at home. But she scrolled. Here's the thing. The provider has to be licensed or a contracted agency. And look at this. She enlarged a tiny line item. Processed by RMC Advisory, Care Vendor Onboarding Fee. RMC. Raymond and Company. He's not a provider, I said. No. He's an advisor. And he's onboarding Silver Hearth Services, which doesn't exist in the state database. It's a trade name registered last month too. She turned the screen so I could read the name. It was Lila's maiden name, tucked into an LLC like a blade hidden in a bouquet. At church that Sunday, the pastor announced a new ministry for caregiver support led by Lila, and people clapped. Someone from the women's group whispered that Ray had generously offered to donate his time to help Eleanor's paperwork. The world's rule snapped into place. The person who smiles at coffee hour controls the story. If I refused to sign, I would be the ungrateful mother sabotaging her son's burden. If I signed, the stipend would flow and no one would ask questions because everybody loves a family sacrifice. I stirred sugar into my coffee and decided to choose the role I feared most. All right, I told Peter at the kitchen table that night. If I'm such a burden, let me be one properly. I'll sign. But I want everything official, licensed agency, caregiver logs, the whole lot. Lila's eyes glittered. Absolutely, she said, too quickly. I already started a care plan template. She slid me a form that was oddly polished for a woman who claimed she'd downloaded it that morning. At the bottom, in minuscule font, I saw RMC. Ray's office had formatted my burden. I signed the dependency declaration, not the power of attorney, and asked for copies. My fingers shook when I wrote my name. Hannah texted one line. Paper trail starts now. I didn't sleep that night. The credit union teller, Mara, had been a girl the first time I'd balanced the hospital payroll with her aunt at the desk beside mine. Now she was a mother of two who noticed when a signature didn't sit right on the page. Mrs. Whitfield, she said on the phone, lowering her voice, the authorization has your name in blue ink and a second name in black, and the second pen didn't even try to mimic your slant. I asked what the authorization allowed. Weekly cash withdrawals of the caregiver stipend, she said. It references a vendor registration, but the account holder is, she hesitated. It's the LLC. Your daughter-in-law's LLC. It wasn't enough to suspect. I needed to prove. And I needed to do it inside the rules so that when I pulled the pin, the blast wouldn't take me with it. I called Ray and said sweetly, I'm confused by all these forms. Could you walk me through the vendor onboarding? He was delighted to explain, a generous man sharing expertise he'd billed to enough widows to confuse memory with entitlement. We register Silver Hearth as a provider with the annuity, he said. You log care hours. The stipend gets disbursed monthly. It's cleaner to have it go to the provider directly. That's how we do it. It is cleaner, I agreed. So clean I'm afraid to touch it. I asked him to send me an email summarizing our plan for compliance. He did. His email contained a sentence I knew would matter. Once dependency is declared, reimbursements to provider do not require beneficiary signature for each disbursement. He was thinking of efficiency. I was thinking of evidence. I forwarded everything to Hannah, who replied with a stopwatch emoji and a phrase that made me sit up in the semi-dark. State Fraud Unit loves caregiver logs. I moved as if I wanted more help than I could manage. I lost a pill organizer and asked Lila to fill a new one, this time while I filmed her hands with my phone behind a box of tissues, her voice cheerfully narrating, We do this every week for the care logs, don't we, Nora? I left my coat pocket unzipped to misplace a copy of the dependency declaration and watched as Peter, thinking I was asleep, slid it into a kitchen drawer under the foil where Lila kept a second set of receipts labeled agency. They were meticulous. Half their audacity was neatness. I visited the union benefits office and asked for a copy of the rider policy under the pretense of updating my address. The clerk, a gray-haired man with a highlighter tucked behind his ear, gave me a packet and pointed with the highlighter tip. "See here," he said. "Provider must be licensed or agency staffed. Cash disbursements to individual relatives are prohibited except under the state care contract. That contract requires an hourly log signed by both parties weekly." He looked over his glasses. "We get a lot of shenanigans. You'd be surprised." "I wouldn't," I said, and I didn't laugh. Small victories. The credit union froze the weekly cash authorization pending my confirmation. Small blows. Lila discovered the freeze when the ATM refused to honor her card, and she cried in the laundry room loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. "We're doing all this for you," she sobbed, sitting on the dryer like a martyr. Peter stared at me with a look I'd never seen on my boy, resentment mixed with embarrassment. "Mom, you're making this so hard," he said. "Ray says it's all standard." The fake benefactor's word had already outranked mine. I went to see a legal aid attorney at the community center, a woman in her 30s who listened without interrupting, which was the first kindness I'd received in weeks. "Limited power of attorney is only good if you trust the agent," she said. "You don't." Good instinct. She recommended a springing medical POA that named Hannah as agent upon certification by a physician not related to my immediate family, my safeguard if they tried to move from money to medicine. She also suggested something I hadn't considered, documenting my competence. "Take a MOCA test with your GP," she said. "Keep the score. It's tedious, but if they attempt guardianship, you have a time-stamped evaluation." That afternoon, Peter paced the kitchen with his phone to his ear. "Ray, it's stalled," he whispered, not as quietly as he thought. "The bank froze it. She's making this complicated." Lila rubbed her temples. "Do we push for guardianship?" Ray's answer must have been encouraging because they both exhaled in relief, and Lila said, with a little laugh that had no humor in it, "Fine. We'll be the bad guys." I recorded that, too. Not to humiliate them later, God knows I had no appetite for that, but because the truth gets slippery when people begin to tell themselves stories about why they did what they did. I wanted our story nailed to paper. The important document disappeared the next morning. The copy of Ray's email summarizing the plan was gone from my drawer. The dependency declaration, however, had stayed put. Someone understood which paper mattered and which paper made me feel safe without being safe at all. I sat on the edge of the sofa and let the fear wash through me like a fever, and when it broke, what remained was decision. I called Hannah. "I need someone who isn't family to see all this," I said. "Not a friend who will take my word. Someone official." Hannah was silent for a beat. "There's a state auditor assigned to caregiver claims in our district," she said carefully. "And Aunt Nora," her voice softened. "I didn't want to meddle before, but I've been watching claim numbers tied to Ray for months. The pattern is unusual." The courthouse smelled like old paper and rain. Pews of strangers rose when the judge entered, then resettled like a flock. Lila wore a gray dress and the face of a woman who grieved for a mother-in-law slipping away. Peter looked anywhere but at me. Ray sat behind them with a leather folder and the dignified sadness of a man who wished things were different. Across the aisle, Hannah slid into a bench with a woman in a navy blazer whose ID badge said Department of Insurance, Special Investigations. Beside them, in a seat so unobtrusive I almost missed her, sat Mara from the credit union, clutching a spiral notebook. When our eyes met, she gave a tiny nod that felt like a hand on my back. The petition was read: confusion, mismanagement, lapsed bills, unsafe behavior. Lila took the stand. "We love Nora," she said, voice wavering. "But last week she boiled an empty kettle and forgot, and the next day she took 2 of the blue pills instead of 1. She smiled sadly. "She keeps losing forms. We're just trying to keep her safe." The judge asked about the care plan. Ray stepped forward to explain best practices and streamlining reimbursements. He mentioned Silver Hearth Services without blinking, as if saying it confidently made it legitimate. My attorney, legal aid, had gotten me one for the hearing, asked to call our witnesses in a particular order. First, my GP testified that my cognitive screen last Tuesday was normal, that I managed my medications unaided, and that I was as oriented as any 68-year-old who keeps other people's appointments in her head. The judge raised an eyebrow at the recentness of the test. "I like to be prepared," I said into the microphone. A small ripple of laughter warmed the room, not at Lila's expense, but at my stubborn insistence on being seen. Then Hannah's companion, the SU investigator, took the stand. She introduced herself calmly and requested permission to present materials pertinent to the question of whether the petitioner's financial care plan creates a conflict of interest. The judge nodded. She projected a simple timeline on the screen. The date Silver Hearth Services LLC was registered, the date the caregiver rider was activated, the date of the first attempted cash disbursement, an email from Ray about streamlined reimbursements. Then she pulled up the state provider registry. "Silver Hearth is not a licensed provider," she said. "It is a trade name owned by the petitioner under her maiden name." The room shifted. Even the court reporter paused. The investigator continued, "In cases like this, when a family member acts as caregiver, payments must be made under a compliant family care contract. No such contract exists here." Additionally, she clicked to the last slide. "Over the past 18 months, Raymond and Company Advisory has consulted on 6 similar rider activations with family-run providers that are not registered." She let the numbers settle like dust. "We have opened a review." Ray stood. "Your Honor, if I may," the judge held up a hand. "You may answer questions when asked." "Sit down." Mara clutched her notebook as if it might fly away. When she was sworn, her voice shook. "I've known Mrs. Whitfield for years from the credit union," she said. "The authorization for cash withdrawals had 2 pens on it. I called because it didn't look right. When I froze the authorization pending confirmation, Mrs. Whitfield came in herself to thank me." She looked at Lila. "And the petitioner came in the next day to unfreeze it, presenting herself as the caregiver and asking if a cash stipend would be less traceable. I asked what she meant by less traceable, and she said," Mara flipped a page, then quoted, "Oh, you know, less paperwork." Lila's lipstick smile vanished. "I didn't say that," she began, but stopped when my attorney lifted a finger and played a short audio clip from my phone, the one in the laundry room, when she'd asked if they should push for guardianship, and laughed. The sound was tinny. The echo of the dryer hummed under her casual cruelty. There was no triumph in me, only an exhaustion so deep it was almost clean. Finally, Hannah stood, not as family but as a professional. She explained, with the gentle patience of someone used to training new auditors, how the annuity program was meant to work. She pointed to the line about hourly logs requiring weekly signatures. She clicked to the next slide, a photograph of Lila's care log binder on our kitchen counter, perfectly filled out before the week had ended. "These entries are contemporaneous only in appearance," she said. "They were completed in advance, which defeats the accountability mechanism." She didn't say liar. She didn't say fraud. She let the process speak. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "The provider's invoice uses RMC's internal template. Advisors should not be formatting provider invoices." Peter sank slowly in his seat. Ray laced and unlaced his fingers. Lila stared straight ahead with the look of someone deciding whether to cry or to rage and calculating which would serve her better. My attorney called one last witness, Mrs. Patel, the neighbor from across the hall at Peter's condo, who had stopped me in the elevator twice to whisper, "You can sit with me if they get loud." On the stand, she described hearing Lila rehearsing phrases like declining capacity, unsafe alone, paper trail, and it's for her own good. Her voice was firm but kind. "I don't know the law," she said, looking at the judge. "I only know kindness when I hear it, and I didn't hear it in those rehearsals." The judge's ruling was crisp. Petition denied. She turned to Lila and Peter. "Any further attempt to access Mrs. Whitfield's benefits through a non-compliant provider will be referred to the Attorney General." And to Mr. Coleman, she added without looking at Ray, Consider this your notice that your involvement is under review. The judge's gavel was a small sound, but it had the weight of the floor under my feet returning. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, my husband's tidy handwriting on the front. For Nora, if caregiver rider is ever activated. Jack had anticipated everything, even this. Inside was a letter and a single-page instruction written in the blunt style he used for household notes. If dependency is declared, change rider to in-home agency recommended by Union Clinic. Notify Hannah as alternate agent. Do not sign any POA not drafted by Union Council. He had included the name of an agency the clinic used for stroke patients, people whose caregivers understood dignity like it was a job description, because it was. At the bottom he'd written, "You took care of everyone. Let this take care of you." I didn't weep. I did what I always do when something hurts. I put it on the counter and made tea. I met with the agency, set up 2 afternoons a week, not because I needed help with pills, but because I liked the way the nurse's aide, Monica, asked me what I wanted rather than telling me what she would do. I appointed Hannah as my medical agent through the Union Council, with language so clear even a creative advisor couldn't misinterpret it. I sent a brief, factual email to the pastor and the women's group explaining that I wouldn't be attending the caregiver ministry meetings led by Lila because our family's plan is under review. People wrote back awkwardly, their mercy recalibrating. The consequences rolled out like measured steps. The Department of Insurance opened formal inquiries into 6 of Ray's rider cases. He resigned from the Church Finance Committee and stopped attending coffee hour, the absence of his blazer leaving an oddly colder space than when he was in it. Lila pivoted from caregiver advocate to victim of a misunderstanding, but the registry audit didn't care about tone. Her LLC dissolved quietly. The group chat went silent for a while, which was a relief. Later, a message appeared from my sister-in-law with no punctuation. "Did you really record them in the laundry room?" I didn't reply. The answer was yes, and it saved me. Peter came to see me without Lila a week after the hearing. He folded himself into the kitchen chair as if he didn't want to crease it. "Mom," he said, letting the word sit. I was drowning in the startup mess, and Ray said the rider was the cleanest way to cover our bills without touching your principal. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. I kept telling myself it was for your care. But it wasn't. It was for me. There was no speech in me about remorse or forgiveness. I slid the tea across the table and said, "You will pay the agency for the month the account was frozen. Your daughter will not hear adult problems spoken in her kitchen. And you will tell Lila, in front of me, that your mother decides her own care." He nodded, not in defeat, but in understanding. At church, Mara passed me a plate of lemon squares and held my gaze a second longer than necessary. Not pity, not applause, just witness. Mrs. Patel left a note on my door with her phone number and an invitation to her granddaughter's school play. The pastor's wife, who had liked the story where our family were saints, shifted to the story where our family was complicated. It's funny how quickly a community changes its narrative when the facts stand in daylight with a badge to point at them. I arranged my days around things that were mine and not a performance of frailty. Hannah taught me to use her budgeting app, and we laughed at how the former hospital accountant had been paying for a streaming service I didn't know I had. On Thursdays, I sat in the library's small tutoring room and helped teenagers with algebra, the language of balance returning to my fingers like muscle memory. I let Monica talk me into a fall prevention Tai Chi class, and we looked ridiculous moving like slow trees, but nobody there was pretending to be a hero. The taste of revenge, if you want to call it that, wasn't hot or sweet. It was clean. A ledger returned to 0. A name pulled off a form it didn't belong on. The bright part wasn't the hearing or the gasps when the slide showed Lila's LLC. It was the quiet of pouring my own pills into the tray with no one narrating over my shoulder. It was watching Peter kneel and tie his daughter's shoes, and then look up at me as if he remembered who taught him to make a bow. It was Hannah texting at midnight, got promoted, and me replying with a photo of Jack's letter like a benediction. If there's a lesson, and I promised myself I wouldn't turn this into a lecture, it's that sometimes the way through is to lean, on purpose, into the thing you dread. I said yes to being a burden long enough to prove what that burden weighed and who had put a price on it. The rule of the world said the smiling helper is always the savior. The document said otherwise, and paper has a way of speaking when people stop listening. I keep Jack's note in the drawer with the tea. I take it out on rough days, not because I need instructions, but because seeing my name in his hand reminds me that being cared for can be a plan, not a defeat. When I lock the door at night, the click is small and final and mine. And sometimes I think about the first time I balanced a ledger after my mother died, numbers snapping into place one by one until the column aligned and I could breathe. That feeling stayed. It's here now, inside the quiet, waiting. Tell me, if you're still listening, what would you put in an envelope for yourself to open on the day someone tries to write your story in a cheerfully colored font?